So for those of you who are joining us via recording, happily I just remembered, and so I've already covered the flow of our conversation slides. So I'll just run through it again very quickly for those of you who are just joining us via recording. So today the flow of our conversation is going to look at covering what it is that we are going to talk about and what we're not going to talk about. Miriam and I will share some stories about how we've been using this assessment and why we're as excited about it as we are. And then Lily is going to talk a little bit about participating in the development of this. She's then going to hand it over to Tamas, who's the AI guru, who's going to talk about, the scientific rigor and the AI aspects of this. And then we'll wrap up with where we go from here. And we plan to have time for questions at the end. Okay, so Lily, next slide. All right, to focus on what we are going to cover, the LeadershipMaturity.ai assessment is joining the conversation that already exists about adult development. And what is one of the things that is unique about this assessment is that it is built specifically for this. And the rigor of the approach is going to be evident once Lily and Tamas start talking about what they've been doing. And it is offering a lot of very powerful insights that are different than the assessments that currently exist in the marketplace. So Lily and Tamas have taken a bit of a different approach to providing the report. It's not mirroring what already exists out there. It has some, as it says there on the right, newly discovered 10 maturity indicators. And there's also some growth levers that are extremely useful. So I think you're going to be excited, as excited as Miriam and I are about what's possible with this as we move forward. So next slide, Lily, please. We're going to assume that all of you are deeply grounded in the adult development framework, so we're not going to have a conversation about that, except as it might relate to the assessment itself. We also assume that you're very cognizant of the ego development theory that Susanne Cook-Greuter developed, so we're not going to go into depth on that as well. And there are, as we know, sentence completions assessments out there already, so we're not going to go into that as well. So that's what we're not going to focus on. If you happen to be somebody who's on this call who is not familiar with this framework, I just want you to be aware that we're not going to cover that. And if afterwards you want to go do some research on that, please feel free to do that. Next slide, Lily. So the assessment itself is, as I've already said a couple of times, what I love the idea that a new assessment is going to deepen the conversation that already exists. So there are lots of very good assessments out there, and they have their strengths, and all we're saying here is that this one is just different. It's adding to the conversation that's already there. So we're not trying to obviously say anything about this is going to replace what's already out there. We think that it's simply going to add to what's already there. So the AI, for those of you who are familiar with large language models like ChatGPT, Perplexity, Gemini, Cloud, whatever that is, those are considered large language models. This particular one is considered a narrow language model. And for those of you who haven't heard that term before, a narrow language model is exactly what it says. It's very, very narrow and very, very deep in one particular topic. And as you might imagine, that particular topic is the adult development framework. So that is what allows the responses to be as accurate as they are. And Tamas and Suzanne's collaboration have focused very, very strongly on making sure that the responses are very correlated with the types of results that a participant would get from a human scored model. And Tamas will get into more details on that as well. Another thing that might be somewhat different about this one is that it is a full 36 stem map. Some of the other ones that are out on the market don't do all 36. So this is a full assessment. And, you know, as I think I've already said, Susanne was particularly generous, not that she isn't all the time. She really is, as we all know. And particularly generous in this case with providing a lot of hand-scored data that could be used to train the model. And it would not be the model that it is without having been able to make use of that. So that's what this assessment is doing. It's analyzing the structure of the meaning making and providing maturity indicators and growth levers that are useful for the participants to see where they are and where they can go from here. So next slide, please, Lily. All right, from here, we're going to shift into telling stories. So Miriam and I are going to talk a little bit about how we've used this before and what we're using it for and why we're excited about it and what we think this assessment does that other assessments on the marketplace have not provided to date. So let's start with me. I'm sure all of you are aware that leadership is changing, you know, with the changes in the global marketplace. For those of you who are in Georgetown, Alicia Rodriguez posted a video and this week, and I can't remember the name of the CEO, but it was the SY Partners CEO who was saying, and I thought she did a great job of naming what's going on. She said, you know, the foundations under us are cracking, and the playbooks that we've been using are no longer working. And so, you know, adaptive leadership is what leaders need to shift to. For those, I'm sure many of you here are familiar with the notion of adaptive problems and technical problems. And so what I've been doing is I've been having conversations with potential clients and clients about the shift towards more of a focus around adaptive leadership from technical leadership, and using this assessment as a way for them to begin to see where they're going to be able to operate within that new framework. And so I had the head of a region do the assessment at one point, and he ended up scoring sort of at the top end of the, I'll use the old terms, achiever level. And when I went over the assessment with him, he was incredibly excited because he, for the first time, was able to see that he had a great deal of ground left to take in his leadership journey. And that was really exciting to him. And as I put it, you know, look how far you've already come, and, you know, great job. And here's what's still in front of you. And that really, really got him excited. The growth levers that he was presented with in the report were also something that was very exciting to him. And you'll see what we're talking about as we go a little bit further. And then, you know, I've also used it with some other existing clients who wanted to go and get another look, for example, at what ground had they taken in the last few years. And what they loved about it also were the growth levers, and the coaching questions that were included in there were deeply resonant with them. So I think it's just a new way of looking at this model and a new way of looking at the results that seems to be resonating very, very nicely with people. So let's shift from here to Miriam, and we'll keep rolling here.
Thank you. I have a client that I've been working with for 3 years, and we've done some assessments. And when we did this assessment, he said, "Oh my God, this got me. This is me. This is exactly me." And when we started to do some work, he loved the growth levers. It was something that we've been working on for a bit now. He just felt it was so understandable. I work with a lot of people that come from Latin America, and they've taken several assessments over the years, and this is something that they're really happy with. So we really, it's, and someone else, both people said the same thing at one point. This assessment is completely me, where I've had a lot of pushback in other assessments, and the ability to get the coaching questions, even before another client, before we even started to review the report, sent me this huge long email about this is so, there's so much here for me to read and understand and grow. And to me, having the 36 sentence completions felt really good as well. And I completely love that. I'm about to do work with a German group and work with a bunch of people there, and they're all going to do this assessment. And they're all excited about it. And it's fresh, it's different, and it's the same on many levels. And it's just another opportunity for our clients to have this, to do this online, to do it quickly, to get the results, to work with a client. It's, I really enjoy working with my clients, especially because they are completely excited about how the responses, the AI is asking them the questions. I'm complete, unless anyone has any comments.
Thank you, Miriam. Lily, if we can go to the next slide. I wanted to show you the new graphic that I think it was Tamas who developed this. First of all, it's very colorful, and I like that. Tamas, I'm going to ask you if I can use this in my book. But you can see from the language there that this is the familiar language that we've seen in Susanne's previous publications. And you can also see, Keegan's numbers across there as well. So we'll go on from here. I could not put this in here. I like it that much. Next slide, please, Lily. Okay, great. So we're going to hand things over to Lily from here and keep going.
Thank you so much, Pamela and Miriam, for helping to organize this and making it happen. I will be pretty quick in the interest of time, and I would love to share a little bit about the motivation that helped us to do what we do. And it's been a 2.5 years journey, and there's many challenges along the way. And so what keeps us motivated is the opportunity that many practitioners and leaders, not only in the Western hemispheres, but in other countries, can have access to this beautiful instrument and framework that Susanne has developed. And I don't know if I have shared the story that I've met Susanne over the years, but I can share it with you when we have a one-on-one conversation. But for me, amongst different adult developmental models out there, I'm deeply touched by the beauty of Susanne's work. And one of the metaphors that I like to think about is that her model speaks to me the way that I look at a willow tree. The older it is, the closer it is to the ground. And for me, it's a journey of a human being to get closer to myself, and yet to also differentiating and integrating the earlier aspects of myself. It's just so beautiful, and it's in and of itself a spiritual journey. And I would love to help bring forward that work, as well as furthering the ego developmental field. And for many of my friends and colleagues who are scorers, who are coaches, who have stayed with the work over the years, I have great admiration for you. And I hope that what we do here, like a drop in the ocean, an offering to help you to continue to do what you do.
Thank you, Lily. Thank you so much. And
I will stop sharing, huh?
yeah. So I'll take over the screen share. And as Pamela mentioned, I'm coming at this from the AI angle. I was a lead data scientist for Amazon Healthcare for many years, and also from brain research angle. I modeled consciousness and brains and humanoid robots for many years. So that's my perspective on this. But really, to borrow a term from Newton, I'm a dwarf standing on the shoulders of giants. And we are fortunate to have one of those giants on the call here today. So I just want to briefly say that I'm tremendously grateful to you, Susanne, for your support and for sharing your work with us. And so much of this is really very, very heavily based on Susanne's work, and I think beautifully showing how prescient it was. And as I hope you will see today, a lot of Susanne's predictions in her writings have turned out to be statistically rigorously possible to substantiate, which is, in my opinion, a tremendous achievement, because what it shows is that she's been really able to capture a phenomenon very, very accurately using only sentence completion tests without statistical methods. So huge thanks, and also massive kudos for what, in my mind, is a tremendous achievement. And so, to frame this and to add to Lily's frame to this, there is a challenge around complexity that Dr. Keegan has pointed out. If we mismatch our complexity with the world's complexity, it's going to be hard for us to navigate this. And there are these clinical numbers up here with the leaders struggling with volatility, uncertainty, and ambiguity. But really, this is for me a challenge that cuts very deep, right? So as the human race, we are kind of failing the sustainable developmental goals. 8 out of 10 of them are not on track. We have uncontrolled climate change. We have increasing political violence and wars around the world. And there are all these interconnected, interdependent problems that are massively complex and that really require good leadership and good cooperation capacities to resolve. We have to figure out how to cooperate and work together to slow down climate change, to support political refugees and war refugees, and eventually climate refugees, and all the other problems that the world has. And part of the reason is leadership, that we are not doing as well as we could as the human race. So in addition to really finding tremendous depth and value in the theoretical construct of adult development, I also wanted to add this perspective that is desperately needed in today's world in order to navigate it in such a way that we leave behind a more positive impact and less violence and less harm to each other and to society and to the planet in the next generation. And so for me, cognitive complexity is not necessary not sufficient for this. It is definitely necessary to understand these wicked problems, to navigate them skillfully, but not sufficient. Somebody who's cognitively complex is not necessarily kind, is not necessarily a skilled servant leader. A great example of this is the correlation with the dark triad. So what you see on the left-hand side, and I apologize for all these numbers, but the bottom line is high cognitive complexity and a powerful intellect can actually correlate positively with traits we definitely do not want in a leader, right? Psychopathy, Machiavellism, and narcissism. The smarter I am, including the cognitive aspect of EQ. So these correlations are a cognitive aspect of Barr's EQ metric, and they positively correlate with things like narcissism and weakly correlated Machiavellianism. So the more intelligent I am, the better I can also get at manipulating others or at making myself out to be the best everybody has ever seen, as we see in some politicians. And so for me, it's not sufficient for good leadership. And I'm not saying this to take away from the other beautiful theories of development. You know, there is Theo Dawson's beautiful work, there's Michael Common's, Fisher's skill theory, and of course, Erickson's and Levinson's lifespan and psychosocial work. I'm not saying that there's one theory in particular that is the best. It's really dependent on context. But my particular interest is the lens of caring servant leadership. And in those terms, I have the belief that Susanne's beautiful model adds a lot to the conversation because it does include the behavioral and the affective emotional components, not just the cognitive. And so the underlying premise here, of course, is what if all of these things, not just cognition, not just the complexity of how I process information, but also my affect, how I feel and how my emotional dynamics, and my behavior, how I act in the world. What if all of these arise from the same organizing principles? And what if those have structure? And what can we say about that structure? And all of you in school, I imagine, already know this, so I can be brief here. But there is this transcend and include dynamic, right? So we start out as babies, as infants, and we acquire capacities, and we transcend and include our ways of operating. So at first, it's all about my needs and my impulses, and later on, I can step back from it and take them as objects and reason about them, and take into account other people's needs. And then I identify through the group, and I can step back from that and reason about my relationships and my groups, and so on and so forth through achiever and the late stages. And so I move from a linear, black and white, either or, self-centered way of being through a more systematic and eventually meta-systematic, both and dynamic and hopefully world-centric and compassionate perspective at the later stages. So one question you might ask is, especially if you're in a cognitive complexity camp, well, does this stuff matter, right? Maybe there is some transcendent include dynamics, and maybe we can cluster things this way. Well and good. Is it important? And so we have a lot of empirical data that it is. And I just show you a few highlights because I have very little time on this call. So obviously, this instrument does correlate with ethics and with care. So it's not just an abstract concept that we move into world-centered compassion. We can actually run interviews, and this is based on Carol Gilligan's ethics of care interview levels, and we see strong correlations with the later stages and high ethics of care, right? Where the circle of concern moves beyond just caring about me to caring about people in my immediate environment and eventually about people who are very different from me and somewhere else. So it expands my level of care, and it also expands my level of care for my environment and my planet, right? So if we look at the environmental commitment here, all award-winning small and middle enterprises in this particular study were late stage in terms of their leadership. And the organizations that caused harm to the environment were early stage. So there was a very strong correlation of stage of ego development based on the sentence completion test and impact on the environment. And of course, as many of you might know, it also makes them more effective leaders for the most part. So there are some exceptions to this, right? It's context dependent, what serves individuals. But on average, if you look at a population or a society or a group or an organization, on average, it has tremendous advantages to be able to have late-stage perspective taking, right? So the left-hand side comes from the Keegan lab, Eigel and Kunert, and it shows about 30% increased executive effectiveness, later replicated with 360s. So not just an academic study, but actually looking at what the employees and colleagues say about these leaders. They are actually more effective, and their numbers look better. We can explain a certain percentage of the variance in successful transformations. So most organizational transformations that do succeed, and by the way, McKinsey has shown that it's a small percentage that succeed, but most of those that do succeed have been led by late-stage leaders. And then there's organizational success that correlates with this, right? So we see more innovation, more success in developing leaders and supporting a supportive leadership style and high revenue per employee in organizations that have late-stage leadership. So I would posit that it does matter where we are on this rainbow. And so the next question I would ask myself is, so what exactly is this space that we're talking about traversing and navigating? So if our bodies unfold and grow in physical three-dimensional space, what might be a space within which meaning-making unfolds and grows? And what might be the aspects and the dimensions of that space of meaning-making? And this is something that I've been able to investigate with quantitative methods. So very briefly, taking inspiration from nature, I applied evolutionary optimization to try to figure out from the raw data, without any theoretical assumptions, what might be the dimensions of this space. So in other words, what space do I have to span up in order to look at these stages as distinct and to have this kind of trajectory, right? So all I'm saying is, here's 80,000 sentence completions, right? Do something with them so that they cluster. That's it. And then the program goes away and tries to investigate and figure out what these characteristics are that separate out and find the structure in this data of meaning making based on sentence completion tests. And many thanks once again, Susanne, for your kindness, for sharing this. Which are really the outcome of this evolutionary process. So they have been discovered from the raw data to explain how this space might be structured and in what kinds of spaces our meaning making might grow. And there are several interesting things about this. I just very briefly want to say that one of the reasons to trust the conclusions of this statistical model is that it seems to correlate pretty strongly with human scoring. So we have, of course, Susanne's data set, and we see 0.96 correlation here with the total weighted score. And we also see about 86% exact stage match accuracy. So this is actually comparable with a trainee scorer who is certified, right? 85% is the certification threshold. And by the way, these numbers have been validated at Harvard Medical School by our collaborator, Dr. Sarah Lazar, who has actually signed that she has independently validated our results. So we can say that the model is pretty good. I wouldn't necessarily say it's as good as a human expert, but it's definitely good enough to meet the certification threshold for a certified trainee scorer. And here is just a couple of other studies that we have to substantiate this number. So we have the study from Harvard, and we have a multicultural study, cross-cultural study from South Africa, where we had non-English speakers and we had non-Western educated individuals in there. So it's really interesting that the instrument itself actually is conducive to accurate scoring, even for individuals who are not native speakers or who are not culturally Western. If I have time, I can show you some interesting data. They have actually outperformed a Western cohort at the comparable stages in some aspects of maturity. So this is really interesting differences in the profile and the weighting, especially emotional, spiritual, and sociocultural aspects. But the overall scoring works tremendously well. So in the time I have remaining, I want to show you some interesting data. So one aspect of this is, of course, yeah, this is kind of cool. We can AI score now, and this makes it available to scale the instrument, right, and to make it available to individuals who might not be affluent or have the life situation where you can spend thousands of dollars for a trained human scorer to evaluate the report, right? So it really makes this approach scalable, and we can offer it to a much larger sample of the population to benefit from. But beyond that, beyond the practical scalability, I think one of the exciting aspects of this research is that we can look at, well, ego development theory makes these predictions. Do they seem to be true? And surprisingly, most of the backbone of it seems to be exactly right. So I just show you a few of these pieces of data just to convince you that there is really something here. And again, it's tremendously impressive that Susanne was able to read this from qualitative data, from text data over decades of labor. So, for example, the alternative pattern that we differentiate and we work on a separate sense of self, and then we integrate more and go back to society and become more group-centric and differentiate again at expert and integrate again, and so on and so forth. And that interleaving pattern shows up exactly in the data. And this is a massive sample. We have almost 2,500 participants here, and you can see the exact same zigzag pattern as posited in 2 decades ago in Susanne's beautiful publication. So it does seem that she was exactly right in terms of the integration and differentiation pattern. And this is a proxy based on the Big Five, but it does hold up in terms of people who are more integrated, being more agreeable and more integrated and more extroverted compared to people in the differentiation phase. The other thing that's really interesting is that this arc shape, right? The stepping back from looking at ego development as a ladder, right? And looking at it as a return to the ground of being. I'm going to build up a strong sense of self that's very separate, very strong, going after achievements, and then slowly see its constructed nature and deconstruct it until I return, as Lily so beautifully said, as a willow to the ground of being, right? And this is exactly the shape of the statistical manifold of the data. So if I take these maturity indicators that were discovered by the evolutionary algorithm back here, and I just throw all the data in here, and I try to project it down to 2D so I can show it on a slide so that you can see it in two-dimensional space instead of high-dimensional space, the shape of the data manifold will be an arc, exactly as Susanne predicted, with the early stages on the left-hand side and the late stages you see here in dark, in teal, blue, and violet on the right-hand side. And because it's very difficult to squeeze high-dimensional data into low-dimensional spaces, the separation doesn't look clean here. But what you don't see here, but it is statistically the case, is that they also cluster. So it's not only the case that it's an arc, it's also the case that it's an arc of groups of data, where data points of the same stage are closer than data points of differing stages. So stages aren't just a theoretical construct, they are the arc and the clusters in it are the shape of this data, which is fascinating. So I'm just going to have to do a time check here. I think I still have 3 minutes, but Lily, please keep me honest here. If I still do have a few minutes, then I just want to show you another piece of validation that we have here, because still, some people could still be skeptical and say, well, this is all very beautiful academic research, right? This is the arc of human development, and we can validate some of these claims, pretty much all of these claims, the vast majority of these claims of this theory. But does it have practical applications? And so what we have done is we have applied a trained AI that can score comparably accurately to a certified human score. And we have scored 146 leaders, where about 60 or so were senior management or vice president or higher. And all of them were leaders. All of them were at least managing a small team. And they took the sentence completion test. They took leadership assessments, such as the multi-factor leadership questionnaire and the leadership practices inventory, gold standard psychometric assessments, such as EQI, which is the emotional intelligence quotient, of course, an IQ test, GRE, which is the graduate records examination, and several other aspects, such as mindfulness. And then they shared, voluntarily self-reported their career metrics with us. When have they been promoted? They got a raise. And how have their teams evolved? And so this is pretty consistent with what Dr. Keegan and his team has found. So they have found 1.3x advantage of late-stage leaders. We have found approximately the same thing here. So plus 33% of leadership ratings here on MLP LPI and MLQ, and commensurate comparable increases in emotional intelligence of later stage leaders. And interestingly enough, it also benefited their career trajectory. So they had massively higher salary growth and promotion rate than early conventional leaders. And we could actually generalize this beyond the corporate world to startups as well. So you see the large bars here are the corporate leaders, and early conventional and conventional tended to be relatively stagnant, not to sound judgmental, but they just haven't had promotions for a few years or salary raises, whereas people at a later stage generally had at least one promotion or at least one raise in the last few years. And it's the same pattern in startups as well. So stagnant or dysfunctional top teams in startup organizations that have strife, conflict, or they collapse, they tend to be conventional or early conventional. And then the teams that kind of figure out their tensions and they thrive and they support their employees, and then eventually the startup exits or makes it or and has a positive ROI, they tend to be at least early post-conventional and tend to have the capacity to perspective take. And then the final thing I wanted to just briefly show you, these are some of the maturity indicators. We don't have time on the call to go through all of them, but they're basically those dimensions of meaning making. So each of these is one of the dimensions in which meaning making unfolds. And so surprisingly, and again, these are things that dropped out of the data, right? The algorithm discovered them from the raw data. And surprisingly, they correlate with gold standard psychometrics quite strongly. So we have this 0.5 correlation with the quantitative GRE, for example, for analytical reasoning, which makes sense. That's exactly what the GRE quantitative measures. But the AI discovered it autonomously based on the data. That this cognitive complexity is one of the aspects of adult development. Another aspect, of course, as we talked about, is the emotional, the heart aspect. Am I compassionate? Am I kind? Am I a servant leader? And so it does correlate with personality traits such as the warmth. This is kind of like the big five. It's a different personality inventory. So it correlates with warmth. It also correlates with EQ in terms of emotional integration and EQ. And these are all highly statistically significant correlations, significantly less than 0.1 p-values. And interestingly enough, there is a spiritual aspect here too. Again, dropping just out of the data. And we also have a strong correlation here with Hanley's mindful meta-awareness scale, 0.44 correlation. And then there is the aspects of, am I coherent? Do I walk my talk, right? Do I have integrity? Do I act in alignment with my own values? And those psychological metrics of McAdams also correlate here with what the AI thinks is relevant here for adult development. So this is really interesting because it says that, you know, the space which kind of validated the arc and the dimensions of this space, they are not just arbitrary constructs that an AI has dreamed up. They actually correspond not just to metrics which allow us to judge or to gauge somebody's developmental stage, which it does with about 86% accuracy, but each of them also have grounding in something that gold standard psychometrics have already established, right? So it's not the same thing as those gold standard psychometrics, but it's grounded in it. It has construct validity, to use the technical term, which is fascinating and which also means for practicing coaches that now with one instrument, with one sentence completion test, I get not just the stage of development, but I get all these different aspects of meaning making, right? Without that leader having to take a GRE test, an EQ test, a personality test, a narrative coherence test, and a mindful meta-awareness test, which could take them hours and hours and hours. I get all of these numbers which have construct validity from one SCT. That takes less than an hour. I need to wrap this up, but I just want to mention one more thing here, which is that you know, everybody in this call knows higher isn't always better. You know, the game isn't about pushing people to get to late stage, right? It really depends on what's adaptive for an individual. It may not at all serve them to get to higher, to later stage, I should say, not higher. So if I don't yet have a strong positive sense of self, I definitely do not want to deconstruct it and then go in the construct-aware direction, right? If I just started a startup and I'm in this beautiful achiever mode, right, I may not want to even be self-questioning. I may want to stay in my achiever role. And similarly, I want to be very mindful of stage crashes and integration work, right? Maybe I just want to explore and integrate and let the other parts of me catch up to the stage that I inhabit. So this is definitely not to say that higher is always better, but for some coaches, some of the time they may benefit from and be interested in exploring later stage functioning. And if that's the case, then one of the things that this statistical model also can offer is to help navigate this arc. So we can see it as kind of like an aid, a kind of GPS to see, okay, right, where are the decisions that I can make, what capacities can I lean into that will be catalytic for later stage meaning making. And before I wrap up, I'll just show you one example where self-transcendent awareness for a large percentage of late-stage population is really catalytic. It's really a gatekeeper for late-stage functioning. So we cannot really, according to this data, attain late post-conventional or even post-autonomous stages without at least having a little bit of capacity to decenter, to step back and look at our own thoughts, feelings, and meaning-making machinery in order to function at those late stages. So this would be one example of a growth lever, right? If I am at a, for example, achiever stage and I do want to grow into post-conventional capacities, to some extent I need to cultivate decentering in order to be able to grow into post-conventional stages. And one size does not fit all. So depending on the maturity indicator profile and depending on the sentence completion test, different individuals would get very different growth levers that can support their growth. But this would be just one example that is tremendously important for upgrading the meaning making for coaches that benefit from that and where that's adaptive. And I just briefly end on this slide just to say that, we are not intending to replace coaches. That's not the name of the game here. So Miriam mentioned the coaching questions that are generated, and they are in the PDF to support the coachee and the coach. But it's tremendously important to work with a coach who's attuned, developmentally trained, and who can understand the context of the client. The sentence completion test does not know the client's context. The AI doesn't understand which context this client is operating in. And so it's tremendously important to work with a coach. And right now we are not offering the assessment unless individuals actually work with a developmentally trained coach or with one of our partners. And then, of course, all of you, probably much better than I do, know about the importance of client agency and collaboration and humility in terms of epistemic stance towards this and really any other kind of model. As George Box said, all models are wrong, but some are useful. So it can be a useful hypothesis to guide the coaching session. It's good to be humble about it. And if your intuition or attunement says otherwise, discard whatever the AI says. And finally, we're going to have 2 papers out very soon, and we are continuously monitoring for fairness and bias. And we're very open to research collaborations. So please reach out if this is something that's of interest. And I think I'm out of time. So thank you so much. Pamela, back to you.
Miriam, would you like to talk a little bit about next steps before we go to the Q&A?
Sure. Lily, do you want to put up the slides? Can you please?
Yes, I'm going to go
Before-
straight to the next step. Yes.
Okay. Before I even get into that, if anyone does not want to be included in the recording for the Q&A, please just privately message me so we can remove your little section if you're asking any questions. Okay, thank you. Onboarding for all of you that are interested, we can do several things. Number one, you can always get in touch with Pamela or I for further questions. We have an onboarding, which all of you can do. You can also do your own assessment, getting on, since you're coaches and you're very astute in this work. And if you're interested to continue and have another workshop, please let us know, because we fit in a huge amount of data, information, thoughts into this. We squeezed it into this hour because we want to make sure that we're complete with the hour. And we're really looking forward to having all of you do the assessment and take the next steps with us. It would be absolutely great. And promo code. When you apply, when you go into the maturity assessment, you get a promo code, and we will be issuing a promo code. And what we do is you pay based on who you are. And since we're only working with coaches, you'll be paying for the assessment with a promo code, which will be issued. And we'll give you further information as we go along how to get into the system.
Thank you, Miriam. Lily, I think, did you want to put the form link into the chat for people who want to get more information?
Yes, I will put the form link to the chat. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. So we do have some time for some questions, and there are some questions in the chat. So let's go ahead and start there. I'm going to back up to the one that Kathy put in. And Tamas, just to let you know, in all likelihood, you're the one answering all of these questions, just to give you a heads up. So the first one is, did the human adult development theorists learn anything new based on the output from the AI analytical output? Actually, Susanne, maybe you should answer that question since you're the human adult development theorist on the call.
First of all, thank you for letting me listen in, because I wasn't till the day ago, I didn't even know this was happening. It mostly confirmed what I had intuited from looking at the data myself. That was a really big surprise, especially the arc shape. I've kind of been a challenger of these series in that sense. And with non-Western participants, it's also good to know that it can be applied that way.
Beautiful.
So I'm very pleased I have made that transition to AI.
Yay. Thank you, Susanne.
Thank you so much, Susanne. And just to briefly say, because Susanne is extremely humble here, so the shape of the manifold confirming her research is a tremendous achievement. It's extremely rare in the social sciences that somebody can intuit decades in advance of the statistical methods existing what the statistical structure of thousands of data points will look like down the line, right? So I think that's hats off for that. I just wanted to say that because you're too humble to say it, Susanne.
Could you explain, while we're on that question, the different axes that the scatter plot we're referring to?
Yeah, it's too complex for these 10 minutes. You know, the method is kind of like taking a two-dimensional projection. The way your shadow on the wall would be a two-dimensional representation of you. And it's not as easy to say, to boil it down to a single direction. So it's a linear combination, an affine transform, a linear combination of many of the maturity indicators. If I needed to oversimplify and somebody hand a gun to my head and I needed to say something in 10 seconds, then I would say that it's roughly complexity.
Because the
every
arc
brief thing I can
represents
say
the
is
separation you mentioned, right?
Yeah, there's definitely the building up of a strong differentiation and then a return of the ground of being. So there's definitely one of those, the self-transcendent awareness aspects that I mentioned before, the capacity to decenter and deconstruct and de-reify at later stages, de-reification. That's a big correlate in there. But there are many others of other capacities of the meaning making. So I'll just share the paper with you once it's out. That's the easier way to answer. Thank you for the question.
Great. And David, thank you for jumping in and asking that question. So Dan, you asked a question in the chat as well. So I'm just going to go with what David did and ask you to jump in and ask the question yourself instead of me reading it off in the chat.
You're muted, Dan.
Yeah, sorry. So I'm not proclaiming any expertise in statistics. I thought that somewhere along the line, I learned that a correlation coefficient of 0.5 or greater in the social sciences is considered significant. The correlations presented here were less than that, like 0.38, 0.4. So I was just curious, Tamas, if you could speak to that.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for pointing that out. So there's three aspects to this. One is we have to distinguish between statistical significance and the strength of the correlation. And when I said very strong, I meant the statistical significances. The relationships are extremely statistically significant. They're almost impossible to be due to chance. The p-values are 0.0001. In very few cases, just 0.005. So very statistically significant. That's one piece. The second piece is because this is the construct validity, so the external validation of something new, the bar is lower. Quite a lot of construct validity studies have 0.2 or 0.3 correlation if you look at recent meta studies. So 0.4, 0.5 is actually pretty strong for construct validity studies. And the third thing I would say is all of these dropped out of a model that tried to model adult development, right? And all of them heavily correlate with Susanne's conception of what adult development is. It's impossible for one number to both strongly correlate with one thing and an orthogonal thing. It's just not possible. So each of them kind of try to figure out, so what's a way to model emotional intelligence or self-transcendence or analytical reasoning skill whilst still staying in a developmental framework and having our cake and eat it too. So that's a third reason for the correlations being very low, because the correlations need to be extremely high with stage of adult development. That's a hard requirement for all of these dimensions. And then in addition to that, they have external construct validity. So it would be impossible for all of them to have close to one correlation, because then they wouldn't be developmental aspects, right? Then they would be those psychometrics in themselves. Thank you for the question, Dan.
I didn't understand.
Yeah, thank you. Go ahead. Okay. So I think I'm just taking a look at the time here, and I know that there are still a number of questions in the chat. One of the things that Lily has done is put in the chat a Google form. And if you have a question that didn't get answered in, you can see how brief an hour is to try to convey everything that there is to say about this assessment. Please go ahead and just include that in the form, and we'll get back to you with an answer on that. There are some broad questions that perhaps we could answer on this call that would be broadly applicable. So there's a question about certification. So does an individual need to be a certified coach with some other assessment, or is ICF certification enough? So the answer to that is there is a certification for this assessment, and in order to be able to take that certification, you have to be somebody who has a fairly extensive knowledge of this adult development model. So when you put in your request to participate in the certification, there will be some questions about, what is the extent of your knowledge of the model. We want to be very careful because, this is a model. If you roll it out in an organization and you don't do it well, it can actually be impactful in a negative way. So we want to make sure that you're well grounded in the model before you're certified in this. And then there was also a question about, do you have to take the assessment to see a copy of the report, or is there a sample report that can be shared? So I'll speak to my own experience of taking the report. I think it's important to take the assessment yourself and see what the results look like for yourself, because looking to see what somebody else's results are is not going to allow you to have felt somatic experience of receiving those results. So I don't know, Tamas, if you have a sample even report that you're willing to put out, but I would say take the assessment yourself.
I would second that. Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. So we're getting it out the door with a minute to spare, and I'm going to use that minute basically to say gratitude to Lily and Tamas for the extraordinary work that they've done.
And to Susanne.
And to Susanne for
the giant who made all this possible.
Who is the extraordinary collaborator. And then thank you to all of you for being willing to take some time this morning to come and hear about it. We're all super excited about what the possibilities are. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you very much. Very, very intriguing.
Thank you.
Blessings, everybody. Have a good
Be
weekend.
well.
You too, Joanne.